The town laughed when Mountain Man chose her. 3 years later, they all bowed down. The saloon fell silent on that November evening in 1823, the kind of silence that makes a man's heart beat loud in his own ears. Jacob Boone Callahan stood in the center of the Red Ridge Tavern, his massive frame casting shadows across weathered floorboards, his buckskin jacket creased from 3 months of mountain solitude. The fireplace crackled behind him, casting his scarred face in amber light, a face that had scared children and made delicate ladies clutch their pearls for the better part of a decade. "I'm taking a wife," he announced, his voice gravelly as river stones, with an accent shaped by Appalachian hollows and Western frontier silence. The room erupted, not in congratulation, but in laughter, the cruel, unthinking kind that echoes off wooden walls and settles into bones like winter cold, because standing beside him, her calico dress hanging awkwardly on her broad frame, was Mary Lou Hutchins. Mary Lou, who weighed near 200 pounds and bore every pound like a burden. Mary Lou, whose parents had died in a cholera outbreak 5 years prior, leaving her with nothing but debts and the pity of a town that wore pity like a crown. Mary Lou, whom the merchant's daughter had named Plow Horse, with a laugh that had spread through Red Ridge like infection. She stood with her head bowed, her round face flushed crimson, her thick fingers twisting in the folds of her skirt. The other women in the room exchanged glances, some pitying, some openly contemptuous. The men laughed louder, slapping tables, imagining how a man like Boone could choose a woman like this. Boone had lived alone in the mountains for 7 years. He'd emerged from that wilderness every 3 months for supplies, and every time he'd looked through people like they were glass. Sarah Whitmore, the banker's daughter with her golden curls and figure like a plantation magnolia, sat frozen with her jaw clenched. She'd made a point of smiling at Boone for 2 years. She'd even contrived to spill her drink near him once, hoping he'd help her clean it. He'd walked past as if she were furniture. Old Pete Harrison, the saloon keeper, laughed so hard he had to grip the bar to stay upright. "Boone, you gone soft in the head? There's 3 unmarried women here prettier than a new saddle, and you pick Mary Lou? The girl can barely fit through a door." Boone said nothing. He simply removed his worn leather jacket, the one with fringe along the sleeves that he'd earned in skirmishes with bandits, and placed it gently around Mary Lou's shoulders. The gesture was so tender, so deliberate, that it shut down the laughter like someone had thrown water on a fire. In that single motion, he'd transformed the tavern from a place of mockery into something more complicated, something that made even the cruelest among them feel a twinge of shame. "Miss Mary Lou," he said, and his voice was different now, soft as moss, firm as oak. "You ready?" She nodded without looking up, and he took her hand. Her palm was damp with sweat and shame, but his grip was steady. They walked out together into the mountain evening where stars were beginning to pierce the purple sky, and the door closed behind them with a decisive click. The saloon remained quiet for a long moment. Then Pete broke the silence. "Well, I'll be damned." The Reverend married them the next morning in a small ceremony attended by fewer than 20 people. Mary Lou wore her late mother's ivory-laced dress, and though it strained at the seams, Boone looked at her as though she were draped in silk from Paris. He kissed her forehead during the vows, and she began to cry, not from shame this time, but from something that might have been hope. By that evening, they were gone from Red Ridge heading into the mountains that Boone knew like some men knew their own hands. 3 years passed, and Red Ridge forgot about them, or tried to, because sometimes rumors trickled down from the mountains, trappers and hunters carrying stories back to town like merchants carrying exotic goods. "There's a settlement up there," they said, "about 15 miles northeast of the abandoned Richardson property, in a clearing that shouldn't exist in country that rough. A man named Boone built it, has a trading post, a sawmill, a schoolhouse. That can't be right," folks said. "No man builds alone, not that kind of thing." But he didn't build alone. That was the remarkable part of the story, the part that made people shake their heads in disbelief. He built it with her, with Mary Lou. In the spring of 1824, Boone had led his new wife into the heart of the Appalachian frontier, to a valley he'd discovered years before while running from his own ghosts. The clearing sat surrounded by dense forest, with a creek that ran clear and cold year-round, and soil rich enough to grow anything. More importantly, it was isolated enough that a man and woman could start over without the weight of Red Ridge's judgment pressing down on them. That first year was brutal. Boone built their cabin from white pine, cutting and notching logs while Mary Lou cleared the land. Her back was strong, though her neighbors in town had never bothered to notice it. Her hands, though they'd grown soft during years of poverty and idleness, hardened into capable instruments. She cleared rocks from fields with a determination that surprised even Boone, who'd expected to carry most of the burden himself. "I won't be dead weight," she told him one evening, her voice fierce as she held up her bleeding palms. They were blistered raw from pulling stones. "I won't be the burden they all said I was." Boone took her hands without speaking and wrapped them in cloth he'd boiled clean. He'd learned some of this from the Cherokee women who'd taught him to live in the mountains. He'd learned that healing requires both precision and tenderness. He applied a salve made from bear fat and willow bark, and he never once made her feel ashamed of the blood and effort that had created those blisters. Their second year, the settlement began to form. Boone had reputation in certain circles, the kind of man who knew the land, who could survive things that would kill ordinary people. When word spread that he was establishing a trading post, that he was willing to broker goods and information in this remote valley, people began to come. Not settlers initially, but traders, trappers, people who existed on the margins of society, people who, like Boone himself, had reasons for preferring isolation. Mary Lou transformed their cabin into something more. While Boone managed the business side, negotiating with traders, organizing supplies, maintaining equipment, she created community. She cleaned a small space and lined it with benches and a small writing desk. She taught herself to read and write with meticulous care, working through the few books Boone brought back from his supply runs to Red Ridge. By the third winter, Boone's Haven, as people had started calling the settlement, had grown to include 5 permanent structures: their cabin, the trading post, a long building for communal gatherings, a smokehouse, and a small building with a stone fireplace where Mary Lou had begun her real work. She was teaching. It started by accident. A trapper named Dutch Bill had brought his daughter to the settlement, hoping to establish themselves. The girl, Sarah, was 8 years old and unable to read. One evening, Mary Lou found her sitting alone by the fire and simply asked if she wanted to learn. Sarah, who'd never had such a thing, offered gently, began showing up every evening. Word spread. By winter, Mary Lou had 6 students ranging from 7 to 15 years old. Children from families passing through, orphans that Boone and Mary Lou had taken in, even the half-Cherokee daughter of a trader who'd been turned away from Red Ridge's so-called proper school. Mary Lou taught them letters and numbers, but she also taught them something else, that learning was a gift, that education was a door to possibility, and that girls and boys of mixed blood and questionable parentage deserved the same chance as anyone else. Boone would watch her from the doorway sometimes, his weathered face soft with something that looked like wonder. She'd sit between 2 children, her reading glasses perched on her nose, spectacles he'd specially ordered from Philadelphia, her finger moving across a page, her voice patient and warm. The woman whom Red Ridge had deemed unworthy of notice had become essential to the survival and growth of their community. It was the winter of 1826 when the sickness came. It started in November, brought in by a trader who'd come up from Knoxville. The fever hit hard, a relentless bone-deep cold that made men delirious and turned a woman's skin waxy and gray. It spread through the settlement with terrifying speed. Within 2 weeks, more than half the population of Boone's Haven was bedridden. The doctor from Red Ridge wouldn't come. Too remote, too dangerous, too many uncertainties. Boone rode down himself in brutal cold, snow stinging his face, and begged, literally begged on his knees in the Red Ridge physician's office. Dr. Morrison, who remembered Boone as the wild man who'd caused trouble years back, was unmoved. "There's nothing I can do there that you can't do yourselves. Keep them warm, keep them hydrated, pray if you're the praying type." He'd paused, then added with something like cruelty, "Your wife too sick to care for them all?" Boone had left without answering. He rode back through the night, his hands near frozen to the reins. He found Mary Lou exactly where he'd expected to find her, in the community building which they'd converted into a makeshift hospital. She moved from person to person with bowls of broth, clean cloths, and a steady presence that seemed to draw out fever like a poultice. She looked like a ghost herself, her face pale, her movement slow, her voice hoarse. She'd been working for 18 hours straight, by Boone's estimation. "Stop," he commanded, though the word came out like a plea. "You'll kill yourself?" "Then I'll die doing something that matters," she replied without looking up. She was changing the dressings on a child's chest, gently cleaning away mucus that the fever was producing. "That's more than I'd have gotten in Red Ridge." For the next 6 weeks, Mary Lou barely slept, but she also barely got sick. It was as though the fever recognized something in her, a strength that had been forged in poverty and loneliness, a will that refused to break. Boone worked alongside her, doing the heavy labor of hauling water and wood, of making fires and repairs. But it was Mary Lou who provided the true medicine. She remembered things she'd learned growing up poor. Willow bark for fever, ginger for nausea, honey and vinegar for cough. She made poultices from herbs that grew in the valley, gathered root vegetables that had been stored for winter, created warm broths that nourished where they could. But more than her remedies, people needed her presence. She sat with the terrified, held hands with the dying, whispered reassurance in the dark. By early February, the sickness had run its course. Of the 37 people in Boone's Haven when the fever arrived, 32 survived. The 5 who died, an elderly man, 2 young children, a trader, and an infant, were buried with ceremony and respected silence. The living buried their grief and began the work of recovery. It was a clear afternoon in late February when the riders came down from Red Ridge. There were 5 of them, moving slowly through the snow, led by a man on a gray mare. Boone, who'd been splitting wood, set down his axe and waited. Mary Lou came to stand beside him, her hand finding his without conscious thought. They'd learned, in these 3 years, that they made a stronger unit standing together. The riders approached, and Boone recognized the lead rider with a jolt of something he couldn't quite name. It was Thaddeus Whitmore, the town mayor, the banker, the man who'd owned half of Red Ridge's buildings and most of its morality. "Boone," Whitmore said, dismounting slowly. He was older than Boone remembered, his face lined with the kind of weariness that comes from real worry. Behind him came his wife, and then, surprising everyone, 5 other townspeople from Red Ridge. "Sir," Boone acknowledged, his hand still holding Mary Lou's. Whitmore approached on foot, moving with deliberation. He stopped 6 feet away, and then, in a movement that made his companions actually gasp, he knelt in the snow. "Mary Lou Hutchins Callahan," he said, and his voice carried genuine emotion. "I've come to beg your forgiveness and to thank you for my life." Boone felt Mary Lou's fingers tighten around his, felt her surprise vibrate through their joined hands. "Mr. Whitmore," she said softly, "I don't understand. 3 weeks ago, my granddaughter came down with fever," Whitmore continued, kneeling in the cold without apparent discomfort. "We sent for every doctor we could find. We gave her every treatment known to medicine, and she worsened. We were preparing to lose her when one of our servants, a woman named Grace, who'd worked here briefly last year, remembered something you'd taught her." He paused, his breathing heavy. "An herbal remedy. Something you made for the children who got sick last year. Grace made it from memory, gave it to my granddaughter. Within 2 days the fever broke, my son's only child. She's alive because of you." Mary Lou was crying now, tears streaming freely down her face. "I also know," Whitmore continued, "that the fever came to our town 2 weeks after a trader came back from here. We didn't suffer as you did. We had homes, we had the doctor's visits, we had help. You had each other and your own strength, and you saved 32 lives. The entire population of a town that ridiculed you, that called you names unfit to repeat, and you saved us all." The other townspeople stepped forward then. Boone recognized the schoolteacher, Mrs. Eleanor Patterson. He recognized Pete Harrison from the saloon. He recognized Sarah Whitmore, the banker's daughter, who'd once looked at his wife with barely concealed contempt. "We were wrong," Sarah said simply. Her voice shook. "I was wrong. You were brave and kind when we were cruel and small. I hope you can forgive us someday." Mary Lou looked at each of them, and Boone could see her struggling to find words. Finally, she simply said, "There's nothing to forgive. I was never angry with you. I was only sad. Sad that you couldn't see past what you thought you saw. But I understand now that you were doing the best you could with what you understood. People are often cruel when they're frightened. I'm not angry. I just hope you've learned what I've learned." "What's that?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "That every soul deserves love," Mary Lou said. "No matter their shape, their circumstances, their failures, or their past. Every single soul deserves someone to believe in them. My husband believed in me when the whole world was laughing. That belief changed everything." She looked at Boone as she said it, and his chest tightened with an emotion so large it nearly choked him. Thaddeus Whitmore rose to his feet, brushing snow from his knees. "We've brought gifts," he said. "Seeds for your spring gardens, tools for your settlement, a shipment of books for your school. It's not enough, but it's a beginning. And I want you to know that Boone's Haven is welcome to trade at Red Ridge freely. No one will bother you. No one will judge you. In fact," he paused, and something like pride crossed his weathered face, "I've told everyone in town what you've accomplished here. You've become something of a legend. The woman who was rejected and the man who saw her worth have built something real, something good. Over the next 5 years, Boone's Haven transformed from an isolated settlement into a recognized community. It became known as a place of learning, of healing, of acceptance. People came seeking the woman who'd learned to read and who taught without judgment. They came seeking the man whose scars told stories of survival and transformation. They came seeking a way to start over, to be seen, to matter. Mary Lou's school expanded. She brought in another teacher, an educated woman from Philadelphia who'd also been rejected by society for being too independent, too intellectual. Together, they created a curriculum that rivaled Red Ridge's own school and surpassed it in many ways. They taught practical skills, mathematics, reading, writing, but also philosophy, science, and art. They taught that the world was larger than the boundaries anyone had drawn for you. Boone's trading post became a hub for information and commerce. He maintained strict neutrality with various factions, Native American tribes, frontier settlers, government officials, and in doing so, earned respect across communities that might otherwise have been at war. He was a peacemaker without meaning to be one, a bridge between worlds. But what mattered most to them happened in the quiet moments. It happened in the mornings when Mary Lou would wake and find Boone already awake, watching her sleep with an expression of such tenderness that it nearly broke her every time. It happened in the afternoons when she'd bring him lunch while he was working, and he'd stop everything to sit with her, their shoulders touching. It happened in the evenings when they'd sit by their fire, the real fire in their cabin, not the community building, and she'd read to him from the books that had become her sanctuary. "Do you remember," she asked him once 5 years after that day in the tavern, "when you first told me you were choosing me, what you were thinking?" They were sitting on their porch, looking out over the valley that had become their empire of kindness. The settlement spread below them like a model town, every building carefully placed, every pathway intentional. "I remember the laughter," Boone said slowly. "I remember how it sounded like a weapon. And I remember looking at you and thinking, this woman has been laughed at her whole life, and she's still here. She's still kind. She still smiles. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen." "I was so ashamed," Mary Lou whispered. "That day in the tavern, I wanted the earth to open up and swallow me." "I know," Boone said. He reached over and took her hand. "But you didn't let the shame win. You could have believed them. You could have decided they were right, that you were worthless. Instead, you built a life worth living." "We built it," she corrected. "I could never have done any of this without you." "Maybe not," Boone acknowledged. "But I never would have wanted to. Every good thing I've built here has been alongside you. Every moment that matters has your fingerprints on it." They sat in silence, watching the sun slide toward the ridge of mountains in the west. Somewhere in the settlement, Children were playing. Somewhere, someone was cooking dinner. Somewhere, lives were being lived with purpose and meaning because two people had chosen each other when the world said they shouldn't. It took exactly 10 years for Red Ridge to realize what they'd let slip through their fingers. By 1833, Boone's Haven was larger than Red Ridge itself. It had become a stopping point for people traveling west, for seekers of all kinds. It had become a place where a woman could come and learn to read, where a man could escape his past and build a new identity, where children of mixed parentage could sit in school without shame. The schoolhouse had been expanded twice. The trading post had become a central hub for commerce across 3 states. And standing at the center of it all were Boone and Mary Lou, looking less like pioneers and more like the founders of something that would outlast them. When the delegation from Red Ridge came to ask them to return, to encourage Boone to run for territorial representative, to ask Mary Lou if she'd advise on education reform, they were almost embarrassed, almost ashamed of how they'd treated these two people who'd become legends. But Boone and Mary Lou declined. They didn't need Red Ridge's approval anymore. They'd built something real, something that would endure. They'd built it on the foundation of one man's faith in one woman and one woman's refusal to accept the world's judgment of her. They'd built it on love. 20 years later, when Boone was nearly 70 and Mary Lou was in her 60s, people still told stories about them, about the mountain man and the rejected woman, about how they'd transformed a clearing in the wilderness into a beacon of light, about how two people who weren't supposed to matter had changed the lives of hundreds. Boone never got sick. The way he seemed to carry an iron constitution into old age. But when he finally passed, it was peacefully, with Mary Lou's hand in his and the knowledge that they'd built something that would live after them. Mary Lou lived another 15 years, continuing to teach, continuing to welcome the rejected and the broken. She became something like a saint in local memory, the woman who'd loved enough for two people and taught the world what that looked like. Their grave markers stood side by side in the small cemetery that had grown up around Boone's Haven. The inscription on his read simply, "He saw her when she was invisible. He loved her when the world laughed." And hers. She was rejected by everyone. She became indispensable to everyone. She taught us all what strength looks like. But the real monument to their love stood everywhere around them, in every person who'd found acceptance at Boone's Haven, in every child who'd learned to read and dream, in every wanderer who'd found home. The town had laughed when the mountain man chose the plain, rejected woman. 3 years later, and every decade after, they'd learned to bow down instead, not in mockery, but in respect, in gratitude, in the recognition of something real and true and beautiful. That's what love looks like when it's given without hesitation, without shame, without apology. That's what a life looks like when you're chosen exactly as you are.